from the sun, and not our Chohan is singing, Awaken to love everyone. I would have you feel it, the precious pink flame in your heart, till great fire of perfection, of Godhood from love's own great heart. Oh, my dear ones, your voices blending, strapped to the veil, life without end, each heart that waits for love's true expression, shall feel that oneness forever and go. Search throughout life till you find it, for love is the nature of God. To know Him as love will transform us, inspire us to live neath the rock. Service in love, precious Nada, will nourish the flame in each heart. The beauty of God's ministration, thy angels forever impart. Thy flame of peace, its ray of cheer, flows from thy heart, devotion's sphere. Jesus our Lord, the true way adoring, my cosmic Christhood illumines the low. O harmony, take thy dominion, tend us each hour of the day. Thy heavenly melody flowing composes all love's symphony. We call forth God's praise and His blessings, beauteous teacher of love. Help us exalt our blessed Father, to live in the Christ light above. Let thy power to image right now bring to all divine delight. Blessed, lovely, goddess divine, thy love with thine shall evermore shine.
Please be seated.
We will speak this morning on the penetrability of the Godhead. Many individuals now living in contemporary society have little but a nebulous concept of the Godhead. They behold in nature, that is, in the sun, the moon, the sky, the verdant and growing things, many glorious ideas embodied scientifically and in a fragile sense of beauty. Because we see that it only takes a little disturbance to bring down a garden as though a scythe had swept across it. Strong wind, the beating of hail, the elements in agony and torment, and the most lovely garden and the most wonderful growing things are reduced to a state of chaos and ugliness. This, of course, shows to us in the battle of the elements that we have a certain savagery manifest in nature which does not in any way resemble, not even remotely, the beauty that we behold in nature. From whence cometh this savagery? Are these strange disturbances in the elements? Where do they come from? Of course, we have discussed the subject before, and we realize that the turbulence of humanity, the self-generating turbulence that they have created, has produced its effect upon the elementals, and that the elementals have returned as a mirror to mankind the face of that which they have sent out. This return of the law of karma is sometimes confusing to us. Like the movie with Gary Cooper, High Noon. We look at this strange pall that seems to be descending at noontide, and we wonder, why is it happening? And we should wonder, because we are witnessing a manifestation of Antichrist. Yet no pastor, to our knowledge, no teacher, no speaker has really revealed this to humanity hitherto. They have not called this Antichrist. They have taken it for granted. We say the sun shines, it rains, it storms, the hurricane beats against the land, and all this seems to be a perfectly natural order. Yet in going back into the early days postulated by the Scriptures, we find where it says that a dew came up and watered all things in the garden. And so the natural order, the face of nature, in bygone days was one of continual sunshine and continual beauty and manifestation, and the natural processes of nature were carried out not by storms and flood and hurricanes and earthquakes and destructive activity, but they were carried out in an orderly fashion. And the dew came up heavily in the morning upon the grass and the flowers and the growing things, and sufficient water was gathered by the natural dew processes, so that it was not necessary for rain to fall or for darkened skies to manifest. Now, this simple analogy embodying nature is going to reveal to us a little of the penetrability of God. And we are going to see some things we have never seen before this morning. And this vision that will be vouchsafed to us will help us to understand ourselves better. And in understanding ourselves better, understand too what it means to be an embryonic God rather than a mortal caught between the jaws of human vices and advices until he seems literally crushed by the confusing elements of life and unable to exercise the privileges that were given to him in the beginning, take dominion over the earth. Let us then stop for a moment and consider the structuring of the person. You, as a person, how were you framed? The Bible says that man was fearfully and wonderfully made. We cannot embrace the idea that God had fear, because fear has torment. And we interpret the word fearfully here to mean so wonderfully complex as to be a labyrinth of such depth and wonder as to hold us in a state of eternal awe and reverence. In other words, this is not fear in its sense of torment, but fearfully made in the sense that its intricacy was so involved and marvelous that one stood in awe, which is another form of fear of it all. And I think basically, as we look at the face of nature and catch but a small slice of nature, a glimpse of it, that we see how very fearfully and wonderfully, which is added to it as another adjective, we are made. Now, it stated that God is a spirit. We can accept this. We understand that a spirit does not have flesh and bones as ye see me have. We understand that a spirit is like the wind that it goeth whithersoever it wisheth to go. It is not bound by any circumstance, that its movement is unimpeded by obstacles. And somehow or other, we are imbued with the attitude of a spirit because we were made in the image and likeness of God, who is a spirit. Then the confinements of the prison house of the flesh seem less confining. We are less bound simply because we have thought of ourselves as a spirit. But if we are a spirit, then we also are made in the image of the Spirit of God, the Creator. And if in His image and His likeness, then we can consider and ponder that the likeness of God was spiritual. So then we are not really flesh and blood that cannot inherit the kingdom of God, but we are spirit sparks of universal identity. But the Spirit is not dense. The Spirit is not possessed with density. The Spirit is mobile and penetrable. And the penetrability of the Spirit makes it possible for the depths of the riches of the wisdom of God, which is in Christ Jesus, to penetrate into our depths of being. Do you see? In other words, because we are spirits, the depths of the wisdom of God can penetrate the depth of our spirit and be manifest within. Now then, if the Spirit is not dense, and as the face of nature manifests its savagery, which savagery emanated from humanity, we must ask ourselves, where is the dense layer of human savagery? Where does it repose or lay its ugly head? How does it manifest? How is it involved with us? And how can it be penetrated by the Spirit? How can it be dissolved, or can it be dissolved? Is it a part of the real identity and nature of man? And what is its role and function in creation? Right now, if Archangel Gabriel descended through the heavens and stood here in our midst, he would say, as he did long ago on the hour of the Annunciation, I am Gabriel, which stand in the presence of God. Men today who have repudiated the Godhead or chosen to vest him with other names, who seem to feel that the idea of God is repugnant to them, feel this because there is no lock-in of the identity of God in themselves. They have so loosened the hold of the divine within themselves that all that is actually manifesting in them is that bottomless pit of vain desire, which continually, like a kaleidoscope, changes its form and shape and produces ever new desires and dissatisfactions, which create boredom and delusion. But now we have Archangel Gabriel standing here in the presence of God. The presence of God is real. The presence of God is tangible because we are His offspring. We are the children of His thoughts. We are the children of His heart, the products of His imagination. We are everything in the Spirit that God is in the Spirit. But we have the intrusion of substance, misqualified. Misqualified substance has collected in our being, and there is no penetrability of this substance. The substance remains in dense layers and is not penetrated by God's reality. and so he seems far away and distant, a remote being, except in moments of spiritual lucidity, when the descending presence of God is felt momentarily as elation, as a thrill, as a sense of movement, as a sense of freedom, as a sense that we can shock ourselves out of the numbness of human density and suddenly realize that this God lives in us, that we are his offspring, that we are shoots of the divine seed, that we have pushed through the earth, that the sun is there even if we have not yet pushed through, that the sun is warming and revivifying that little spot of earth, that little piece of clay that confines us to substance and form and density and darkness and despair because of separation and of a sense of a lack of the cosmic intent manifesting in the mind and the consciousness of being. We are now engaged at this time in discoursing under the direction of the great divine director on examination of the field of consciousness. And so, as a part of that, we bring to you this morning this lecture on penetrability, because the penetrability of nature has made manifest to us a seeing through a glass darkly of the face of God in nature. The flowers that we think are so marvelous and wonderful are themselves not yet manifesting that which they shall be, for they have not taken upon themselves the quality of the immortelle, referenced by Saint Germain. The immortelle is a never-fading flower, possessed with immortality. Its petals do not fall, its fragrance does not wane. It is composed of essential light from the Spirit of the Most High God, and it remains a glowing flame flower, capable of transporting itself and its consciousness through space. This idea is not known to most people. They have no concept of the reality of God. We have actually, like ships that pass in the night, gone by the Christ ship of state, majestically sailing through the seas and heading toward a safe haven known to the master pilot. We in our frail bark of consciousness have passed by this ship in the night of human consciousness, and we have not seen the light. We have not even seen the twinkling of its beacons or perceived its radar signals flashing forth, because it is guided by the master pilot and the ascended masters. In the chart room of this great ship, they know where they are going. But humanity does not know. And humanity does not know because it has felt the need to control souls, bound here in the same realm as we all are. It has felt that its mastery of the earth is concerned with methods of control of men and women, hypnosis and treachery, the creation of ideas for the sake of deceit. In the present political campaign, we are witnessing what the Master has called the sticking of images. This morning as I woke up, he said to me, "You are seeing, Mark, in this current campaign as in many others, the sticking of images." And I pondered upon his words, and suddenly I was aware that Madison Avenue has done the same thing that the laboratory scientists have done in creating through the DNA chain of diseases designed to carry out certain aims of destruction in human consciousness. The crowd known as the Madison Avenue crowd and the Hollywood crowd that are so adept in psychology and the understanding of the human psyche have created images, and they have stuck these images up before the people and asserted them. They have tried to stick these images into the consciousness of the people as we would throw darts at a dartboard. they do this. They say, our candidate is a gilded lily. He's white, he's beautiful, he is the best for you. And they try to stick that on the conscience of the people. And they say, here are all the other candidates. They are black as sin, and they are unworthy, and they try to stick that image on you, you see. And this is exactly what is taking place, a truly despicable activity, but one which is going on every Sunday in the churches. It goes on in the churches because Satan himself has tried and has succeeded to a relative degree in sticking the image of sin upon the hearts of the people. Now, we cannot say or deny that no sin or error exists in the world. But we can say this, that if man is ever to be free, if he is ever to exercise his Christ freedom and attain it, he must be able to divorce himself from the sense of sin. Because so long as he feels the sense of sin and the weight of it, he can have no sense of the Christ, and the light of the Christ cannot penetrate the darkness that is in him. And therefore, he is not ever really free. But they have told men and women that one man has died for the people, and because of the death of that one man under the scapegoat Jewish consciousness, the whole world is free. Go and read the Bible and the Scriptures. Read in the Scriptures the statement of the high priest and others, where they said, it is fitting and appointed that one man should die for the people. And you will realize that it was human beings who decided, out of the old Atlantean and Lemurian blood sacrifice, where the young maidens were thrown to the mountain gods down into the vast crevasses, and where they were stabbed and their beating heart held up as a sacrifice to the people, you will see that in those old blood sacrifices, which sought to appease the deity by death, the concept of Christianity or Christ-iamity has been aborted and confused, so that individuals are made to feel that someone's death is going to give them life, when the only real and true teaching was revealed through St. Paul after the death of Christ as the apostle to the Gentiles, when Paul came forth and clearly stated that it was appointed unto man once to die, and also said, behold, I die daily, and pointed out the death or mortification of the human density patterns, so that the living Christ could come forth in the consciousness of the individual, out of the tomb of matter and materiality, that God could come forth in man and be born anew in man. Ye must be born again. This is real, not the sacrifice of someone else, but the sacrifice of our own density, our own abnormalcy, our own patterns, the clouds that have obscured the sun of identity in our own personal sky. This had to be penetrated by the Son. And the Son of reality, the Son of God, the light of God, the Logos, the living Word, the seed that is planted in the heart of man, is to create out of the embryonic God a living Christ, so that every man, not just one, is a duplicate of the Father. A duplicate of the Father. This is not blasphemy, but it is the pattern that the enemy has used in reverse to create blasphemy and turn around and say to people, who do you think you are, a god or something? Why, there's only one perfect man, and they crucified him. These are lies of the dark forces that are calculated to keep us groveling in a sense of condemnation. Our purpose is obscured and God's purpose is unknown, while we continue psychologically to be a gambit skewered upon some sort of a hook, like a smorgasbord where we can be toasted in flames and people can say, why, you're a terrible being. You're an awful person. And you can believe it. You know, it's the easiest and most natural thing in the world for individuals to believe that they are terrible. And they believe it for a while. And then somehow or other, there is a shaking down in the heart of the earth. There is a rebellion that arises in men. There is a feeling that this is not so, but their feeling is not justified. But this shaking comes forth, and it becomes a terrible resentment, and it turns into a burning self-righteousness that desires to turn against its condemners, including the self. And thus we see that come full circle, man goes through a state of ascending unto heaven where he thinks he is really on the right path, and then he begins the condemnation process and he goes down into the depths, he descends into hell, and there he begins to feel that he is unworthy of even being anything, and then after a while he begins to decide that this isn't right, and those who have condemned him, including his spiritual teachers, who have not really condemned him, but they've told him what is right and what is wrong, now he comes up and he says, I am right. But you see, this is self-righteousness rather than divine righteousness. And you see, therefore, that there is a very definite vicious circle involved in the whole process of the idea of a blood sacrifice or someone dying for your sins, when actually what is necessary is that someone live, not die. It was the life that Christ manifested that actually was the powerful example that gives us the courage to let the penetrability of the Logos come down into human beings and penetrate the density of human beings. Because you see, the light of God that created man never did sin. God never sinned. The light never sinned. The truth in man never erred. You can't impute death to life. The life that is God in man has always been God, has always been life. You have to realize how simple this really is in order to see how cleverly they have construed it. And therefore, what has happened is that around the white fire core of the identity of God, the flame that appeared to Moses in the burning bush, I am that I am. Around the I am, around the descending God that came down into flesh, man has builded these clouds of consciousness and spun out of the cocoon of ignorance dense patterns ensouled by the energies of God. In other words, within we have light, but all around the light we have the misqualified activities of the light. We have error and misunderstanding. We have false judgment of ourselves and others. We have false opinions and concepts about God. We have the broken threads, all hanging there in the air, all misqualified, dark substance, tarry substance. It's all hanging there. And now God's light comes down, it tries to reach us. Why? Well, you've got the dark glasses on. You can't see the sun. You've got heavy smoke glasses on. You can't see. You've got to have penetrability. This, of course, is the washing of the water by the Word. This is the cleansing away of the accumulated dust of the centuries. This is why the violet flame is valid. This is why the flames and the light of God are valid to us, because they are atomic vibratory action. And the power of the atomic rays from the Master's realm, from the cosmic realm, from our own presence. Had a little help from the angels here. The power of the presence that comes down and shakes the chalice. I mean, that's what we need. We have to have shaking. We have to have purging. We have to have our verbal spankings. We have to have our spiritual lashings of our karma returning to us. This is all essential. Because if we did not have it, you see, there would be no washing of the water by the word. The obscuring identities that are islands of darkness all around us, thickening clouds of sensuousness and sense consciousness, are builded up century after century, layer after layer. And through them runs the thread of human intelligence. I mean, we examine, the human intelligence takes all these little things apart. And human intelligence examines them all. The whole chronology of existence, it's like a diary. Somebody keeps a diary when they start out in high school, their first date. And the whole thing is recorded. And hour after hour, every little experience is written down in meticulous detail. And if the details had been a bit more meticulous, and we had filmed everything in Technicolor and full sound, the question we must always ask ourselves is, when would we ever find time to review them? So what validity is there to these psychic experiences that are accumulations of centuries of living? There is no more validity to a life reading of going back into your past history and examining all of your errors and sins and stains and structurings of the past than there is of examining your present condition. You are not going to find your freedom by examining the dirt that's around you. The only thing that you can do is transmute it. Now it's true that once in a while the great masters see fit at a certain stage in a man's development to give him some insight into his past in order to help him to understand some of the tendencies of his nature. But these are not the be-all and end-all of a man's freedom. They are not the way of freedom. They are assistances in understanding that are given to people in order sometimes to help them to tie to the good that they did in the past, not the evil. Because even in the lives of some of the most cruel men, you will find some great activities of goodness that have been performed. And sometimes this was essentially the power of the light within the darkness to wrought the will of God even in the darkness. Because I think that there has been a gestation period involving the darkened centuries where there has been a stirring in the womb of life toward Christhood, toward universal identity. It's like the little plant that comes out through the rock, and the rock is crushing this root ostensibly. It's a heavy rock, but it doesn't crush this root because the root continues to grow and pushes the rock and breaks the rock and shatters it. And the first thing you know, the blossoms are coming forth out of the rock, out of the shattered rock. And that is exactly what we have. Calcination and density. And the penetrability of God's light is the only thing that will establish a contact with the reality of heaven. Someone now has been writing about Venusian cities. They have talked about crystal palaces and towers and the wonderful beauty that can be experienced on Venus. I am not concerned how much beauty is on Venus. I am concerned on how much beauty is in our soul. If by contemplating this idea of beauty on Venus you can bring beauty into your soul, that's one thing. But it would appear to me that there is beauty everywhere in the universe. Right where you are, the corner right where you are, as well as corners you've never seen or never dreamed of even in your wildest imaginations. And I have no doubt that seeing that transcendence is the law, that people will find that they can step up their vibrations and rise in their ability to cognize beauty where they are or elsewhere. The whole of it is our limitations. Are we able to see beauty? And then, in addition to seeing or perceiving, the one and greatest question of all is, are we able to be beauty? Because the word beauty begins with B-E. And then it says B-E-A-U-T, which is ought, and references out of. And then comes the word I. And then the word full. Beautiful. It means be out of the I am fullness. And that is the meaning of the word beautiful. Bow. The bow that ties man to his identity. Take a bow and tip it upside down. And what have you got? The figure 8. The energies of God from the higher sphere, the macrocosm, interchanging with the microcosm. And that's all reality. That's the Christ. The flow of the Word, the Logos, down into humanity. We aren't denying that people have created these blacknesses and this density. That cocoon is spun around every person. But it varies from one to the other. Some people have lots of density. Some people have very little density. You will meet people who are ethereal people in this world. And you will meet people who are so gross and dense that they can't even understand that they should say hello to their neighbor. You get all kinds and classes of people in varying degrees of density. The more density, the less penetrability, and the less penetrability, the less reality that's brought down into the heart of that person. But the greater the need for it. So, the real washing of the water by the Word is the penetrability of God's light that finally equates to us on the personal level a sense of the reality of God above, that as above, so below, will be interpreted to us, that this embryonic God will first ascend in consciousness and then be prepared to ascend physically. You cannot ascend physically unless you first ascend in consciousness. This is a must. This is a necessity. You and I have to ascend in consciousness, and therefore the field of consciousness is all important. It means that we leave behind the dregs of the poisonality that's in the cup of life. We leave the Borgias and all the other poisoners and all the things that involve ourselves, all these spheres and strata of density, all these manifestations that have caused us pain, and all envy and all greed and all desire to abort the truth or to twist the truth as the politicians and some of the religionists are doing. Well, I want you to realize that the first thing that the religionists would do if I became world famous, if the masters brought me to the point or pinnacle of fame in order to make the teachings available to mankind, the first thing that they would do would be to assault my personality. They would try to look into the poisonality and find every drop of poison they could, every mistake or apparent error that had ever been made from the time the child was practically out of the womb unto the present hour. And then they would amplify that and say that is everything, and all the good that is manifesting or the knowledge that is manifesting is nothing. And because of this, you shouldn't pay any attention to him because he is nothing. And this is what they do with everybody. They do it all along the line. And they do just the reverse with the high priests of darkness that are in the world today, wearing the mantles of fame and are teaching lies to the people that are further distorting the curvaceous lies of the centuries that like a corkscrew have bored into human beings and have confused them to the point that they don't know which way is even up. They don't. And I know from personal experience that people who pray every day are full of hate for someone who has a different doctrine or teaching than they have. If people don't believe exactly as they believe, they are ready to hate them, to the point almost of murdering them physically. I have seen this. I have felt it, and I know it is true. So you see, the world is in a very sad plight, but you and I and all the world are also in a place of great delight. You know what that place of great delight is? It's the place of recognizing that it doesn't matter how much density we have around us. What matters is that the light can penetrate it. It's the penetrability of God's light that is promising us our freedom. We can't find our freedom out of the density. We can't dip our hands down into this moldering earth and lift this earth up and say, this is going to save me. We've got to forsake that. We've got to understand that that will be transmuted with one burst of cosmic flame, that it will melt this substance. The elements shall melt with a fervent heat. But the fervor is in the spirit of man, and the fervor that's in the spirit of man is the fervor of God as a molding factor, as the potter molding the clay. He wants to mold the clay, and it's his power that creates the fervent spirit that lifts a man up to the realization that he can penetrate all of his own darkness and all of the natural darkness or unnatural darkness of the world and see the light of God clearly. And when he sees it, he realizes that there has never been any sickness in the consciousness of God, that there has never been any sense of frustration in the consciousness of God, that there has never been any boredom in the consciousness of God, that all the qualities of universal patience are in the consciousness of God, that universal mercy is in the consciousness of God, that universal love is in the consciousness of God, and that that love is going out into the world and into the universe with its pulse beat every hour of every moment of every hour. Put it any way you want to, it's going, it's pulsing, it's beating, it's throbbing, it's living. And the light shone in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Our job, our responsibility, our work, God's work, is to comprehend the light. And as we accept the potential, the possibility of the penetrability of God's light, the power of this great cleansing powder to come down and dissolve this accumulation of density and substance by its energies, to free up the atoms of this misqualified substance, to break apart the tendrils that hold it together, the cohesive power, to allow it to float free in the ethers and then annihilate it and change its nature by the substance of the flame, we will see that our sky will ultimately be one through which the marvelous light of the Christ can come full-blown into manifestation. It can sweep down into our heart and make our hearts as sweet as a rose, as the heart of a rose. And what we will manifest is true divine love. No dishonor, no deceit, no practicing to deceive, but the clear face of holy reason and the clear face of holy power and the clear face of whole identity, not mortal identity. Density must be penetrated. Density must be broken up. And that's what the world has. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of man, doesn't live. But what lives is the clay and the form and all of the delusion and all of the confusion that has existed for centuries. It's a dusty, moldy castle of decaying dreams and dead men's bones. That's exactly what it is. And a bolt of lightning from on high can shatter that castle and level it. And in its place we can put up a crystal palace, a kingdom that we can perceive not only as translucent, but as transparent. We must be able to see through ourselves to the Godhead. And if that's going to happen, the light of the Godhead has got to penetrate through our density and release it so that the eyes that are in man everywhere, he's full of eyes, you know, can behold the one God. And in beholding him, become him. And now I speak in closing of the happiness of penetrability. In penetrability, there is no loss of identity. No awareness of self is lost. But the self that once was, that becomes no more, is the self of pain and suffering, of fear and confusion, of questioning. The questing self has now arrived and found its way. This, then, that takes place is transformation. And transformation simply means transform action. Ation is always action. So it's transforming action. And it's always from death unto life. From Satan unto God. From delusion to understanding. From death unto life. From darkness to light. From earth to heaven. From chaos to order. From unreal feelings to reality. You want to make the trade? Amen.